And the Talk Shop proudly returns with second guest this morning, Dan Pasman. Dan Pasman, UNIONHOME Mortgage, 208 East Grand Avenue in historic downtown Laramie, providing mortgage opportunities in the Gem City. And Dan, welcome back to the Talk Shop. What's our credit tip for today?
Yeah, thanks for having me back. No, you look at the credit tips for today. The basic thing is just kind of start to, look at what's it going to take you to improve your credit situation to if you've had credit issues in the past, or honestly, if you don't know anything at all that goes on with your credit score, what do you need to do to be prepared?
Last week we talked about the impact of a credit score and the three bureaus that track credit scores. And this week you've got a little more in depth for us.
Yeah, that's the thing is what is it going to take? Because I get a lot of questions on what would my credit score, what's the impact. A lot of it's going to come down to it is kind of funny with credit scores to an extent. There's some very simplistic things about it. That is, if you pay your bills, your credit score is probably going to be all right. Those two things do go hand in hand. Now, there's, unfortunately, life isn't fair to everybody, and the people have had some rocky spots on life, and they've had to work through some things, So, if you've had some things happen to you, how do you start to work through it? The first one really gets into is start making your payments on time. I don't know how many times over the 19 years I've been doing this that you'll have somebody who really does a pretty good job of making their payments, but every year they have one or two of these little rogue 30-day late payments out there that really take a huge chunk out of their credit score. And that is really it's not a really good number representation for the credit risk they are, but that 30-day late, so those consistent, like even the one or two a year, really takes a toll on things. So that's the first thing. Just, make your payments on time, on everything, lines of credit. The big thing on payments I'm seeing people get bit on is student loans. With COVID and all that stuff coming out of COVID, there were a lot of student loans that were put on deferments, and the way they come out of deferment and things like that has affected people's credit scores, because one of the biggest sneaky things people do is the companies will sit in the weeds and they'll wait to see that there's a credit report hit, and then they'll go out and file their collection to try to make people deal with them before they can financially do something. Because if there's a derogatory that reports while we're in process of doing a home loan, it has to be dealt with when we do the check later. So that's the big sneaky thing that you watch them do. So student loans, make sure you're accounting for them. Make sure you're looking at them. Make sure they've got your most updated information, because a lot of times, I've seen that happen to people as well. So make the payments on time is the most important thing that you can really do.
One of the first steps that we talked about last week was to get your report and use it as a checklist of your to-do items that were necessary in order to build, rebuild, stabilize, strengthen your individual credit. How does somebody get one of those reports, and how much can they expect to spend to do so?
You can go to myfreecreditreport.com and get your free report every year. That is free of charge. Now, you will not get a score with that. But it will show you trade lines. Now, you can go to Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion.com, each one of the companies.com, and buy a credit report from them. And you can usually, I think, the figure on spending about $20 a report.
You talk about trade lines, Dan. Tell us more about trade lines.
Trade lines, every credit card, every car loan, every student loan, every personal loan out there creates a separate trade line on your credit report. And those,
is your phone bill on there? Is your heating bill on there?
Those are not on there. Those are what we would refer to as non-traditional trade lines.
Okay.
So when we look at lending, one of the ways through the door is the traditional way, I'll call it, is that we look at your credit score. We're going to look at what you've had. Have you made your car payments on time? Have you made your credit card payments on time? Have you done all that at time? Now, you will find people out there that they've not had a lot of credit, and you have to show that they've made bill payments on time. So we go out for what's referred to as non-traditional credit, and then we will have to go out to like the power company, the gas company, insurance companies to prove that you've made, utility payments on time, cell phone payments on time.
It's
and
kind of
things
like a
that.
more comprehensive look at credit overall, isn't it?
In a lot of ways, it is. Our current credit scoring model is not kind to a lot of people, and it's not, and specifically people who are self-employed borrowers. It's just not kind to them because self-employed borrowers, especially depending on what kind of business they're in, they have a tendency to, use credit cards then pay them down, and so they have a large amount of money in flux all the time, and so you watch it, it takes a chunk out of their credit score because of their usable trade lines. So people who are self-employed really have to manage things very, very carefully to make sure that they have good credit scores to go with it. Because, I mean, I've seen it many, many times over the years, and so that's, like I said, so it is more concentrated, and it's really good, especially for young people, because it's funny. You can talk to people who have been to classes supposedly understand the credit scoring model. They'll come out and say, I don't understand anything, because it's kind of like the man behind the curtain type approach to how this actually goes down, because your credit scores that you have don't match either, because you have your educational credit score, then you have your financial institutions model score, and so therefore they don't match up, because how many times people say, well, I think I should be good. My credit score on Credit Karma is a 675. And I'll pull the financial institution model and say, well, you're a 620. But why? Well, because how Credit Karma figures, it's different from what I will pull. What you see on Experian.com and a lot of the stuff that comes through the credit cards, it's very common. Someone will say, well, Discover says my credit score is 650. Then you'll pull it and it's a 720. So, I mean, I've seen those agencies that they're artificially high, they're artificially low, and sometimes they're in the ballpark. But so those are really good for seeing the trade lines and seeing what's out there. But the credit score itself is pretty hard to gauge off of those until you have a deal. And
that variation is unkind in and of itself to understanding your individual scoring.
Oh,
absolutely,
because people think they have an understanding of what there is, and then what I'm pulling from a financial institution side differs greatly from what they see, and it's very confusing for the consumer. The one of the things it gets into is it gets into credit inquiries is always been my favorite one.
The number of them, right?
Number of them, and so like on the credit score that you would see through an Experian, a credit card, something like that, they will tell you a hard credit pull will affect your credit score like 30 and 40 points. And people say, well, my credit score my Discover says my credit score just went down 30 points because I had a hard inquiry. Well, on the financial institution model side, the largest decrease you can see in a credit score from a hard pull is usually right around 8 points. It is kind of the area and most of the times, if your credit's good, it doesn't touch your credit score at all. And
are those 8 point impacts something that do they readjust in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What type of expectation can somebody have depending on their utilization of credit?
Well, that's the hardest thing there is with credit, because we all judge our own worthiness to an extent off of what our credit score is, and it's a hard thing that really it's a hard thing to judge yourself off of, and you shouldn't do it, because the credit scoring model was intended to be dynamic and not static. So your credit score will go up and down based on what your credit usage is in a month, where your credit card balances are. They high, they low, where are they at? And so many times what affects your credit score on a monthly basis is your utilization of credit cards, credit lines, and it's really not inquiries are my opinion, a very small part of the matter. Now, I'm not going to advocate you allow everyone to pull your credit willy-nilly, but on the other hand, too, is that you do have that 2-week window. Is if you're shopping for something that's not supposed to affect your credit. So limit when you're going to do something. Kind of get an idea of what I always recommend people is that have one person pull your credit, get your scores, know what it looks like, and then work from the.
Would that be in the industry a pre-qualification type of inquiry? that type of situation?
Yeah, right. You know, that's typically if people will say, you know, hey, I may want to shop around for mortgage, and so what do you recommend? I tell them, I says, and this is how I personally do business. I says, here's the deal: is I'll pre-approve you, pre-qualify you, and then I'll give you what your credit scores are, and then you can take those and then use them as you want to do it. I says, don't let everyone pull your credit. If you want to talk to somebody else, tell them, say, hey, this is what I was told my credit scores are. It's a financial institution model score. And so you know that's exactly what someone else should be seeing, so you can get a pretty good gauge on there. Now, a lot of times, the big thing with, especially in the mortgage business, is that you can go look at someone's credit report and you can tell exactly who has been pulling their credit. So a lot of times that's where a lot of people will say, well, I want to venture towards, you know, doing the soft pull or something like that, is because then you can't see it. So you don't know, you know, and the thing in the mortgage has always been is then you don't know who you're competing against when you're trying to work in these competitive situations. Now my stance has always been, I'm very comfortable with what I do. I am what I am. So here I am, you know, type of deal has always been my approach. But, you know, that's always been, that's a little bit of, you know, I think the industry putting the scare behind that is that behind that is it's a little more self-serving than it is for the customer sometimes.
Our guest this morning on the Talk Shop, Dan Pasman, UNIONHOME mortgage representative in historic downtown Laramie, 208 East Grand Avenue exactly. Dan, tell the audience who might not know you, introduce them to you and your career in the mortgage industry.
Yeah, like I said, I've been in the mortgage business 19 years now. I started December 1st, and back in 2026, and so going on it'll be 20 years this coming up December. And so my joke I like to tell about myself is I started right before the Great Recession was starting to go down. I started like in December, June of 27, the jumbo market went away. I remember watching the jumbo market go away literally overnight on rate sheets, and made my way through the Great Recession. And people say, "Well, Dan, how did you do that?" You know, I mean, I always said my serious joke with that is I was too stupid to know what was going on around me, but I was fortunate at the time that I had a really good system around me, and I had. You know, I didn't have a lot of bills at that time. I was able to learn, and I knew a lot of people were leaving. If I figured out if I could figure out a way through this, there's going to be a lot of opportunity on this, and you know, thank the good Lord, He helped me out, and we made through it, and it's been good to me. So it's funny. I've seen, you know, in going, you know, 19 years. It's funny. You watch the recession go there, and then you watch the pendulum start to swing back the other way. And then now I've kind of watched it go back the other way again with everything's that is. And so that's with saying all that, I think that's one of the strengths I bring to this business at this point in time of my career is that I've seen the full gamut. I've experienced the higher rates because when I was started in the business, you know, I mean, 6 3/4 was a fairly common rate. And you know, while our rates and markets and things like that we're a little bit lower than we are at this time. But I've seen it. I can work the numbers. I can look at it for home buyers, and I can tell them firsthand knowledge. Yeah, when I bought my first house, I was, I think 6 1/4. Is that yes, it's a stretch. Yes, you're going to have to sacrifice, but firsthand, I can tell you, it was worth it.
So in coaching credit, you brought information for us today. I want to make sure we cover each of your tips for today in credit tip segment on the Talk Shop. Help us as we close this segment together. Take us down the path that you've prepared at UNIONHOME Mortgage.
Yeah. You know, and we talk about scores, and we talk about limiting credit cards, but the other thing that goes with that is your credit card balances. You know, ultimately, you should try to keep your credit card balances under 30% of the available balance. So if you have a $1,000 limit on a credit card, you should try to keep your balance under $300. Once you get above that 30% number, it will start to take, a little bit of a chunk out of your credit score. So, that's a big thing and a big thing to managing that is your credit that is available to you. Many people will say, I'm not comfortable with any more than $1,000 of credit limit. I don't like that. But if you're always charging it up to $700 and $800, it may have an effect on your overall credit score. So my advice to you is call them. If they're going to give you a $3,000 limit on it, take it, because then you've increased that lid on it, and it just helps your credit score out with that. I think figuring on 30% is I think from a functional standpoint it's hard. So my general rule of thumb is, especially if you're paying your credit cards off every month, I will tell everyone for functional purposes, 50%, because you'll know if you know your credit limit on a card is $3,000, mentally $1,500 is much easier to figure than some of the times if it gets into an odd number. Now you would say, well, Dan, you just said that $3,000, 3,000, that 30% is not that hard. Yeah, that's true, but so you will see some odd credit limits on cards sometimes. So that's where I kind of lean back on, says 50% is kind of a good mental spot to sometimes work with on a functional basis. Just like I said, the balance is a big one. Now, installment, the thing that helps you the most on installment debt is length of the account. Typically, about 6 months you see an account age from a new account to an old account. So that will help your credit score there, because it shows you have a lot of history in it, history on the account. And the other thing about credit, credit cards and things that have credit balances that you can use and up and down, like a credit limit is that it's the fallacy has sometimes always been is that you have to use it. You don't necessarily have to use it and use it all the time. You just have to have it available to you all the time. When you have it available to you, it's amazing how quickly your score will go up on it. A big thing too is old accounts. People will say, well, I've got this credit card that I haven't used, in 2 years. Should I close it? No, don't close it. Make the creditor close it on you, because once that line is closed down, that closes the age of your accounts out and can affect your credit score by not having enough credit,
enough history, enough time, time of credit. Huh?
So if they close on you for inactivity, that's one thing. You really can't control that, but you just let it sit out there. Take the credit card, shred it, don't use it, but don't close it out on it. You will see a lot of people with trade lines will try to do the self-reported thing where they're self-reporting like utility bills and things like that. I'll be honest with you, I've not seen a lot of good, what I would say, overall impact of people that do that with their credit scores. I thought that would be a pretty big deal that comes across, but I've been a little disappointed in how that's worked. But that's that is something I've seen people do. Main thing is just it's out there. There are a lot of changes to the credit scoring model. There are attempts to be able to make the system more fair. Vantage Score 4.0 and FICO Score 10T are the new methods, but they're new and their impact right now currently is really undetermined. And they're supposed to be, going back to what we were talking about earlier about non-traditional credit, they are supposed to be, good at trying to capture more of the non-traditional credit.
Are they new entrants like bureaus, like the 3 existing bureaus? Are they 2 new bureaus, or how are they entering the industry?
They are. My understanding of those right now is they are altercations of our current bureaus.
Okay.
I talk about the consumer scoring model, financial institution scoring model. These are supposed to be new variations of those aspects of those scoring models, is my understanding on that. And that's unfortunately, we always say that it's impolite to talk about politics and things like that, but unfortunately with my job, politics comes into it with it. And these new scoring models has been a kind of an emphasis of the Trump administration's coming in and trying to look at different home buying affordability models on it. And we'll see what happens. Every president has had their hand in the mix on that. the Biden administration, they had their one big one was the how you scored interest rates, how you priced interest rates through the Federal Housing Financial Administration. And they made a lot of changes to the pricing grid and how it was happening. And they did some couple things that were, pretty interesting on their own. And so that was their hand in the mix. This one, the Trump administration right now is theirs has been the credit scoring model to a mix. It hasn't got evolved enough where they've had the housing agencies, Fannie and Freddie and Ginnie Mae, have kind of been able to fully incorporate what they're into it. But we'll see what happens over the next 3 years and how much we'll see and how much that evolves. There's a lot of things that, and I don't care who the president is that they try are going to do or this or that, and it just never quite makes it around.
Part of going on 20 years of experience is your confidence that those cycles will continue.
Oh God, yes. That is the one thing I learned very early in this business. There's only one thing that's consistent. That's change. It changes all the time, and it's funny. I can tell you what I think every. And when I talk about snapshots of time, I talk a lot about presidential administrations because I found that for me, it's an easy way to grab at a snapshot in time, regardless of whether you agreed or disagreed with it. And that's one thing I will say with every presidential administration. You've watched them all have their own priorities, and some of them are on target, and some of them are not on target. And it's really interesting too that from a political standpoint, there's a lot of people that have been out there in the mix, especially with the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and things like that. I believe that their hearts are in the right place, but they just don't understand what the daily impact to someone like myself is, or the consumers. They really just don't understand that world. And if they would come spend a day with me, I think we'd make a whole lot more progress.
Dan Pasman, UNIONHOME Mortgage Credit Tips on the Talk Shop. We appreciate you listening to this program and all of our programming Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. weekly on this 93.5 FM KOCA Laramie, celebrating 25 years in America's 250-year celebration year.